The old German shepherd was bleeding from 2 wounds, yet he still stood in front of the crack in the mountain, as if something inside mattered more than his own survival. Ash drifted through the air as Ethan Carter dropped to one knee beside his dog. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a wildfire was racing toward the valley. The rock beneath his hand felt strangely cold. Then he heard it, a deep rushing sound hidden inside the mountain. Duke pressed forward again, ignoring the blood on his leg, staring into the darkness where no water should have existed. What do you think was hidden behind that crack? The summer sun hung over the Bitterroot Mountains like a welding torch, bleaching the grass to the color of old bone. From the porch of his weathered ranch house, Ethan Carter stood motionless, one hand resting on the railing, the other wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that had long gone cold. The valley below should have been green this time of year. Instead, it looked tired. Dust drifted across the pasture every time the wind rose. Even the pines on the ridges seemed dull beneath the relentless heat. A black stock tank sat near the barn, half empty. Again, Ethan glanced toward the cattle gathered in the shade. There were fewer than there had been last spring. He'd sold part of the herd to keep the ranch alive. The animals that remained moved slowly, conserving energy beneath the Montana sun. The drought had entered its 3rd month. No meaningful rain. No relief. No promises. Only heat. A familiar weight settled in his chest. The same feeling he got when a mission dragged on too long and nobody knew when extraction was coming. Old habits never really disappeared. They just learned how to hide. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Duke stepped onto the porch. The German shepherd was getting older now. Gray fur had started spreading around his muzzle. His movements were slower than they once were, but his eyes remained sharp, always watching, always listening. The dog crossed the porch and sat beside Ethan without making a sound. Together, they stared across the ranch. 2 old survivors, neither one saying a word. The windmill near the well groaned as another dry gust swept through the valley. Ethan listened automatically. The rhythm mattered. Years ago in Afghanistan, unusual sounds often meant trouble. A generator that stopped. A vehicle where it shouldn't be. Silence where there should have been noise. Even now his brain cataloged everything. Windmill. Fence wire. Barn door. Cattle. Birds. Nothing unusual. Yet, that evening he checked the well again. The water level had dropped another few inches. He stared into the darkness below. Not good. Not good at all. Back inside, he opened the refrigerator, almost empty. A few eggs, milk, leftovers. The practical arithmetic of survival had become part of every day. How much feed remained? How much fuel remained? How much time remained? The house felt larger than it used to, too quiet. His eyes drifted toward a framed photograph on the kitchen counter. Claire, her smile frozen in time. 5 years gone. Cancer had taken her slowly. The ranch had never felt the same afterward. Neither had he. That night, Ethan went to bed shortly after 10. Duke took his usual position directly outside the bedroom door. Guard duty. Same as every night. Around 2 in the morning, Ethan woke instantly. No alarm, no obvious reason, just awake, his heart already moving faster. A faint sound had pulled him from sleep. Tick, tick, tick. Something tapping against glass. He sat upright before he was fully conscious. For a moment, the darkness became another continent, another year, another war, dust, radio chatter, the distant thump of rotors. Then reality returned. Montana, home, ranch. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face. Outside, a tree branch scratched against the window, nothing more. But Duke was already awake. The dog stood in the hallway, ears forward, body still. Waiting, listening. The same sound had reached him first. "It's okay, buddy," Ethan murmured. Duke relaxed slightly, but didn't lie down until Ethan did. Sleep never truly returned after that. By sunrise, he was already dressed. The county envelope arrived just after breakfast. A white pickup from the mail route disappeared down the dirt road as Ethan opened the box. He knew bad news by the weight of it. Official envelopes always felt heavier, even when they weren't. End quote. He carried it inside, opened it at the kitchen table. Read every line, then read it again. Property tax delinquency. 90 days. Failure to pay would begin proceedings against the ranch. The words remained on the page long after he stopped reading. Outside, The windmill groaned again. Inside, the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Ethan folded the notice carefully, set it beside Claire's photograph. For a long time, he simply sat there. Duke rested his head against Ethan's knee. Neither moved. Neither made a sound. The morning passed. Then something strange happened. At feeding time, Duke refused breakfast. That had never happened. Not once. The shepherd sniffed the bowl, looked toward the back window, then stood. His ears lifted. His entire posture changed. Alert, focused, intent. Ethan frowned. What is it? It. Duke was already moving. He crossed the yard at a trot, then broke into a run, straight toward the rocky slope rising behind the ranch, toward the mountain, toward something Ethan couldn't yet see. And for the first time in months, the old dog didn't look tired at all. Ethan stepped off the porch so fast, the screen door slapped behind him. Dust rose around his boots as he crossed the yard, eyes fixed on Duke's gray-black shape moving up the slope beyond the barn. The dog did not stop at the cattle fence. He slipped through the gap near the cedar post, the same gap Ethan had been meaning to mend for 2 weeks, and kept climbing. Duke! The shepherd heard him. Ethan knew he did. One ear flicked back, but the dog did not slow. The slope behind the ranch was rough country, dry bunch grass, loose shale, bitter brush, and scattered stands of lodgepole pine that had been turning brittle under the heat. Above that rose the dark wall of basalt Ethan had always thought of as the back boundary of his world. It cut across the hillside like an old scar, black stone rising out of the Montana dust. Ethan climbed after him, his knees reminding him of every year he had carried too much weight over too much bad ground. Halfway up, he stopped and scanned without thinking. Left ridgeline, tree shadow, rock cut, fence line, clear. It was an old habit, older than the ranch, older than Claire's empty chair at the kitchen table. In Afghanistan, you did not chase anything without checking the ground first. You learned that fast, or someone else paid for it. Duke was waiting near the basalt face, not pacing, not sniffing randomly, waiting. His body stood rigid, tail low, ears forward. His nose pointed at a narrow vertical split in the rock, no wider than a man's fist. From below, it looked like nothing, just another crack in old mountain stone. Ethan reached him, breathing harder than he wanted to admit. What's got into you? Duke did not look back. He pressed his muzzle close to the crack and inhaled. Then he scraped once at the dirt with his front paw. Ethan crouched beside him. The ground there was different. Everywhere else, the soil had baked into pale dust. But right at the base of the crack, under a shelf of stone and dead grass, the earth was darker, not wet exactly, not enough to make mud, but not dead dry either. Ethan touched it with 2 fingers. Cool. He frowned. Duke turned his head just enough for Ethan to see his muzzle. It was damp. Not drool, water. Ethan leaned closer to the crack. A faint smell came out of it, so slight he almost missed it beneath the hot mineral scent of the hillside. Stone, cold air. Something clean. He placed his palm flat against the rock beside the opening. At first he felt only heat from the sun. Then, against his wrist, a thread of air moved, barely there, cooler than the world around it. Ethan went still. The sound of the valley dropped away. No cattle. No windmill. No dry grass ticking against itself. Just the thin whisper of air coming out of the mountain. Duke gave a low whine. Ethan pulled a small flashlight from his belt pouch and shined it into the crack. The beam struck rough stone, angled left, and disappeared into black. The opening was too narrow to see far, too tight for his shoulders, maybe too tight for a man at all. He picked up a pebble and dropped it in. For 1 second, there was nothing, then a faint tick. Another. Then silence. Deeper than it looked. Ethan sat back on his heels. Where does it go, boy? Duke scraped at the dirt again, harder this time. Ethan caught his paw gently. Easy. The dog stopped, but the tension stayed in his body. He kept staring into the crack like something inside had called him by name. Ethan looked down the slope toward the ranch. The barn roof shimmered in the heat. The empty stock tank sat like a black wound beside the corral. Beyond it, the county envelope was still on the kitchen table beside Claire's photograph. 90 days. He looked back at the rock. Old training came forward without being invited. Mark the position. Come back with tools. Don't rush blind into unknown ground. He pulled a can of red marking paint from the saddlebag on the ATV parked near the fence line. He had used it last month to mark broken irrigation pipe. Now he shook it twice and sprayed a short red line on the rock beside the crack. Duke watched every movement. "There," Ethan said quietly. "We're not ignoring it." But when he turned to leave, Duke did not follow. Ethan took 3 steps downhill before realizing the dog was still at the rock. "Duke," and, quote, the shepherd stood frozen. "Come." The command had weight. Duke had obeyed that word through thunderstorms, rifle season, loose cattle, and once through a rattlesnake strike near the lower pasture. This time, he hesitated, only for a moment. Then he came, slowly, looking back twice. The rest of the day moved strangely. Ethan tried to repair fence wire near the south paddock, but his eyes kept lifting toward the black wall above the ranch. He refilled the troughs, checked the pump, counted feed sacks in the barn. His hands did the work. His mind stayed at the crack. At supper, Duke lay beside the kitchen door instead of near his bowl. He ate half his food, then stopped. Ethan noticed. "You planning on telling me what you found up there?" Duke raised his eyes. Outside, the mountains darkened into purple shadow. Heat bled slowly from the walls of the house. Far off, a coyote called once and was answered by nothing. That night, Ethan placed the county letter in a drawer, then checked the locks twice. Duke did not settle outside the bedroom door. He stood in the hallway, staring toward the back of the house. Ethan woke before midnight. The hallway was empty. For a moment he did not move. Then he heard it. Not outside the window. Not on the porch. A faint scratching sound from somewhere up the slope. Steady. Desperate. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the back porch. The beam swept across the yard, past the barn, past the dry pasture, and found movement high against the black ridge. Duke was at the crack again, digging. His paws struck the hard ground again and again, throwing dust behind him in frantic bursts. "Duke!" Ethan hurried up the slope, breath sharp in his throat. By the time he reached the basalt wall, the dog's front paws were dark. Ethan dropped to one knee and caught him by the collar. "Stop! Duke! Stop!" The shepherd resisted for 1 second, then froze under Ethan's hand. His claws had split against the stone. A smear of blood marked the dust. Ethan stared at it. Then, at the crack. The cool breath coming from the mountain touched his face again, stronger now in the night air. Duke leaned against him, trembling, not from fear, but from the strain of being held back from something he knew was there. Ethan looked into the dark opening, and for the first time he heard something behind the stone. Not wind, not an animal. A low, distant sound, like water moving where no water should have been. Ethan remained kneeling beside the crack, long after the sound faded. The night around him had gone still. Above, the Montana sky stretched from horizon to horizon, crowded with stars. The drought had stripped moisture from the air, leaving the heavens sharp and cold despite the lingering heat trapped in the ground. Beside him, Duke stared into the darkness, not barking, not growling, waiting, the same way he waited before a storm, or before a stranger reached the gate. Ethan slowly ran a hand over the dog's neck. The fur there was damp with sweat. "So, you hear it too." Duke never took his eyes off the crack. Ethan looked at the blood on the dog's paws. Whatever was inside that mountain had become more important to Duke than pain. That bothered him and intrigued him. By the time they returned to the ranch, the clock on the stove read nearly 1 in the morning. Sleep never came. Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, while Duke rested beside the bedroom door. Every few minutes he found himself hearing that sound again. Water. Impossible water. The county letter sat in his mind like a stone. 90 days. The well nearly dry. The cattle losing weight. The ranch slipping away one unpaid bill at a time. And somewhere above the house, hidden behind solid basalt, there might be water. At 4:30, he gave up on sleep. The coffee was brewing before dawn painted the eastern ridges gray. By 6, he was loading supplies into the ATV. Flashlights, a crowbar, climbing rope, work gloves, a first aid kit, a small shovel, old habits. Never enter unknown ground without a plan. Duke watched from nearby. The shepherd's paws had been cleaned and wrapped during the night. Even injured, he seemed eager to leave. The moment Ethan climbed onto the ATV, Duke was already moving toward the slope. The mountain greeted them with silence. Morning sunlight slid across the basalt wall, revealing details Ethan had never noticed before. The crack wasn't random. It followed a natural fracture line running upward through the rock. Something ancient, something that had been there long before roads, fences, or ranches. Ethan examined the opening carefully. Then he started working. The first hour was slow. Basalt wasn't forgiving. Every strike of the crowbar echoed through the stone. Chunks broke loose one piece at a time. Dust coated his arms. Sweat soaked his shirt. Duke remained close, watching. Around mid-morning, Ethan managed to widen the opening several inches, enough to push his flashlight deeper. The beam disappeared into darkness, then reflected faintly from smooth stone farther inside. A passage, not large, but real. He crouched lower, listening. The sound was there again. Faint, steady. Water. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the crowbar and attacked the rock with renewed energy. Metal struck stone. Again. 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 The sharp clang exploded through the narrow space, and suddenly the mountain disappeared. For a split second, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Afghanistan. Red dust, blinding sunlight, the metallic crash of a damaged vehicle, radio traffic bursting through static. Contact front. The voice arrived from years away, instant, violent, real. Ethan froze. The crowbar slipped from his hand. His breathing shortened. The mountain vanished. The ranch vanished. For one terrible moment, he stood inside another lifetime. A road outside Kandahar. An ambush. Smoke. Screaming. A medic running toward casualties. Then another sound broke through. A familiar sound. Not radio static. Not gunfire. A soft whine. Duke. The shepherd pressed against his leg. Solid. Warm. Present. Ethan closed his eyes. One breath. Then another. The wind moved through nearby pines. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. Montana, not Afghanistan. Home. He rested both hands on his knees until the shaking left his fingers. Duke never moved. Thanks, buddy. The dog leaned slightly closer. By noon, Ethan was working again. Slower now. More careful. Eventually, the opening widened enough for him to squeeze one shoulder inside. The air that flowed from the passage felt noticeably cooler, almost cold. A strange sensation after months of drought. He shined the flashlight deeper. The beam curved left, then vanished into blackness. A few minutes later, he tied a rope around a nearby pine and secured the other end around his waist. Another old habit. Never enter alone. Never enter unsecured. He removed his hat, turned sideways, and began easing himself into the opening. The rock scraped his shoulders. His shirt snagged twice. Dust filled his nose. For a moment, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. Then the passage widened. Only slightly, but enough. He advanced another few feet. The flashlight revealed smooth stone walls, natural, ancient, and ahead. End quote. And empty space. His beam no longer struck rock immediately. It traveled farther, much farther. Ethan stopped. The distant sound of moving water had become unmistakable now. Not imagined, not wishful thinking, real. His heart hammered. He turned his head. Duke, stay. The shepherd ignored him. Before Ethan could react, Duke slipped past his legs. The dog squeezed through the narrow gap with surprising speed despite his injured paws. Duke! The shepherd disappeared around the bend, into the darkness, into whatever waited beneath the mountain. And for the first time since this began, Ethan felt something stronger than curiosity. He felt fear, because Duke had never run blindly toward danger before. Never. Yet something inside that mountain had just called him forward. Ethan pushed after Duke as fast as the narrow passage allowed. The rock pressed against his ribs, scraping canvas and skin, and the rope at his waist dragged over stone behind him. His flashlight beam jumped wildly across the walls. Duke! His voice came back in broken echoes. The passage bent sharply downward. Ethan planted one boot against a rough shelf, lowered himself through the turn, and felt the air change all at once. Cold, damp, alive. The tight stone throat opened beneath him into empty space. He eased himself down, found footing on a sloped ledge, and lifted the flashlight. For several seconds, he forgot to breathe. The chamber beyond the crack was far larger than anything the mountainside had promised. A vaulted cavern of black basalt and pale mineral streaks stretched beneath the ridge, its ceiling disappearing into shadow. Water beads clung to the stone overhead and dropped at uneven intervals, each one landing with a soft sound that seemed too delicate for a place this deep. Then, the beam found Duke. The shepherd stood 20 yards ahead, perfectly still at the edge of a vast underground pool. His gray muzzle hovered over the water, but he was not drinking. He was watching it. Ethan stepped forward carefully. The floor beneath his boots was not simple cave stone. It had been shaped in places, cut, smoothed, reinforced. His flashlight slid across the pool. The water was dark, clear, and impossibly still. It stretched farther than the beam could reach, vanishing beneath a low stone overhang on the far side of the chamber. Along the near edge, old concrete formed a curved lip, cracked, but intact. Rusted metal brackets stood at intervals like broken ribs. Ethan knelt and touched the surface. Cold shot into his fingertips. Not stagnant, not foul, clean. He dipped 2 fingers, smelled them, then touched them to his tongue. Sweet. No alkali bite, no mud, no rot, just water. Thank. Quote, after months of watching tanks drain and cattle crowd dry troughs, the taste nearly stopped him. Duke finally lowered his head and drank, slowly, like he had earned it. Ethan let the flashlight drift across the chamber again, and the truth began to arrange itself piece by piece. The basin was too even, the concrete too deliberate, the rusted brackets too evenly spaced. This was not just a cave. Somebody had worked here. Somebody had built around the spring, shaped it, contained it, hidden it beneath the mountain. He moved along the pool's edge, keeping one hand on the wall. The air smelled of wet stone and old iron. Under the soft drip of the cavern, he heard another sound, water moving behind the walls, traveling through channels he could not yet see. On the west side of the chamber, the flashlight caught something angular, a pipe, not modern PVC, old steel, thick, corroded, half buried under mineral crust. It ran out from the reservoir wall and disappeared through a collapsed section of stone and dirt. Ethan wiped the pipe with his glove. The metal flaked under his touch, but the line was real. "Who put you here?" he whispered. Duke lifted his head, ears high. Beyond the pipe, against the chamber wall, stood a concrete support pier with rebar exposed in thin, rusted lines. Nearby lay what looked like the remains of an old valve wheel, broken at the stem. Ethan stared. He had seen abandoned infrastructure before. Old mining works, irrigation tunnels, civil projects left behind after funding dried up and people moved on. But this place was different. Protected, hidden, waiting. His flashlight beam caught a faint marking on the concrete. He wiped it with his sleeve. A number appeared beneath the grime. Just a single painted digit, faded almost to nothing. The back of Ethan's neck tightened. In the army, numbers on structures usually meant something. Entry points. Control stations. Sections. If there was a 7, there had likely been a 1 through 6. He stood slowly. The cavern suddenly felt less like a miracle and more like a map with most of its pages missing. Duke moved along the edge of the water, nose low. Despite his rapt pause, he stepped with careful purpose, pausing where the stone changed, sniffing seams and cracks. Near a low pile of silt, he stopped. He pawed gently. Not frantic this time, precise. Ethan crouched beside him and cleared mud with his gloved hand. At first, he found only stone, then metal, flat, rectangular, buried under years of mineral dust and dried sediment. He dug around the edges until the object loosened. It was a sign, heavy steel, rusted nearly through on one corner. He turned it over. The flashlight trembled in his hand. A faded federal emblem stared back through the corrosion. Under it, barely visible, were words stenciled in block letters. United States Department of the Interior. Beneath that, Emergency Water Storage Project. And below that, almost lost to rust, Bitterroot. Sector. Ethan did not move. Water dripped somewhere behind him. Duke stood beside the pool, watching his face. The whole chamber seemed to hold its breath. This hidden reservoir had not been an accident. It had been a government project. A secret buried in the mountain behind his failing ranch. Ethan wiped more dirt from the sign with his sleeve, and another line emerged at the bottom. Authorized access only. The words looked old, serious, forgotten. He looked toward the collapsed pipe leading out of the chamber, then toward the black water lying untouched in the heart of the mountain. Above them, his ranch was dying by inches. Below it sat enough water to change everything. Ethan turned the sign in his hands. A patch of rust broke loose and fell away. Behind it, etched into the metal with a sharp tool, was a date. and beside the date, scratched by someone long gone, were 3 letters: T.C. Ethan held the rusted sign in both hands, letting the flashlight rest against his knee. The initials sat there in the corroded metal like a message from another lifetime. 3 small cuts made by a patient hand, not official, not stamped by a department. Personal, T.C. His own name ended the same way, Carter. He stared at the letters until the cold air in the chamber touched the sweat beneath his collar. Duke stood close to the reservoir, ears tilted toward the darkness beyond the water. The old dog had stopped drinking. His attention had shifted deeper into the cavern, toward the old pipe vanishing under collapsed rock. Ethan slipped the sign carefully into his pack. He did not know what he had found yet, but he knew enough not to speak too soon. By late afternoon, he had crawled back out through the crack, covered in dust and mineral grit, with Duke climbing out behind him. The sun hit them like a furnace after the cold air below. Ethan stood beside the basalt wall and looked down at the ranch. The place seemed smaller from there. The barn, the dry pasture, the empty water tank, the county road cutting pale through the valley. For the first time in months, Ethan did not see only failure waiting below him. He saw elevation, slope, drainage, the way water could move if given a path. He had spent years building and repairing things in bad places with fewer tools than sense. Culverts in flood country, field showers in dust, temporary bridges over dry wadis that turned to rivers without warning. In uniform, you learned that terrain always told the truth if a man listened long enough. The mountain had just started talking. That evening, Ethan spread old maps across the kitchen table, county parcel lines, Forest Service boundaries, a topographical map with faded fold marks. He used a pencil to trace the ridge behind the ranch, then the low ground leading toward his pasture and the neighboring valley. Duke lay near his chair, paws wrapped in fresh gauze. Every time Ethan leaned closer to the map, Duke opened one eye. The next morning, Ethan drove into Darby. The town sat under a sky white with heat, its storefronts dusty and quiet, flags hanging limp outside the post office. He parked near the county records annex and went inside with the rusted sign wrapped in an old feed sack. The clerk, a woman named Nora Pierce, who had known Claire from church, gave him a cautious smile. "Morning, Ethan. Haven't seen you in a while. Been busy trying not to dry out." She nodded like she knew better than to joke about that. He asked about old federal water projects in the Bitterroot sector. Nora frowned. Bitterroot sector? That sounds like something from before my time. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a cardboard archive box that smelled of paper, dust, and mousetraps. Inside were property notes, old survey copies, WPA records, Civilian Conservation Corps reports, and maps drawn by men long dead. Ethan turned pages slowly. Then he saw it. Emergency Water Storage Assessment, Subsurface Reservoir Survey, Unfinished Distribution Line, Bitterroot Sector 7. He did not move for several seconds. Nora leaned over the counter. "Is that what you were looking for?" "Maybe." His voice came out lower than he intended. The documents were incomplete, several pages missing, some water damaged, but what remained was enough. In the 1930s, federal crews had mapped underground springs throughout the valley, planning emergency reservoirs for drought years and wildfire response. Several were abandoned when funding shifted. One was marked as sealed after a rockfall. The location matched his ridge, his land, his failing ranch. On the drive home, Ethan noticed the black pickup behind him for the first time just past the feed store. It stayed 2 vehicles back. Never too close, never too far. At the stop sign near the hardware store, he checked the mirror. The driver turned his face slightly. Cole Brennan. Cole owned Brennan Stone and Gravel, the company that had been buying up dry land across the valley for 3 years. He was the kind of man who wore clean boots to dirty places and smiled like every conversation had already been priced. Ethan kept driving. Cole followed until the turnoff to Carter Ranch, then continued down the highway as if he had never been there. The next day, Cole came by in person. His truck rolled through the front gate at noon, throwing dust across the yard. Duke stood from his place in the shade before the engine stopped. Cole stepped out wearing sunglasses, a pressed work shirt, and a belt buckle large enough to announce itself from across the corral. "Ethan," he called. "Hot one." Ethan stood by the trough with a wrench in his hand. "It's August." Cole smiled. "Fair enough." Duke did not bark. That bothered Ethan more than barking would have. The dog simply watched Cole, with his head low and his body still. Cole glanced around the ranch, taking in the dry pasture, the thin cattle, the sagging fence line. County's been sending letters, I hear. Ethan did not answer. Cole took a few slow steps closer. No shame in it. This drought's breaking good men. I can take the place off your hands before it gets ugly. Cash offer. Fast close. You walk away clean. Ethan looked at him. This place isn't for sale. Everything's for sale when the numbers get honest. Duke moved one step forward. Cole noticed. His smile thinned. I also heard you've been messing around up on that ridge. People hear a lot. That rock behind your place has value. Basalt, gravel, road base, more than cattle right now. Ethan wiped the wrench with a rag. Then you should buy yourself a mountain. Cole held the smile a moment longer than necessary. I'm trying. The words settled between them. Quiet, plain, too honest to be accidental. Cole returned to his truck, but before climbing in, he looked once toward the slope behind the ranch, not at the barn. A. Said or D. Not at the cattle. At the ridge. At the place where Ethan had marked the crack in red paint. That night, Ethan waited until dark before going back up with Duke. He carried no flashlight until he reached the trees. He moved slowly, stopping twice to listen. The old habits had returned fully now. Observe, pause, check the back trail, clear the next piece of ground. Near the basalt wall, he crouched. The red paint mark was still there, but the dust around it had changed. Someone else had stood there. Fresh boot prints marked the ground near the crack. Large, square heel. Not Ethan's, not old. Duke lowered his nose to the print, then lifted his head toward the dark slope above them. A low growl moved through his chest. Ethan looked into the black timber. Nothing moved, nothing showed itself, but the feeling was unmistakable. They were no longer the only ones looking for what was hidden inside the mountain. Ethan stayed crouched beside the boot print, one hand resting lightly on Duke's collar. The dog's growl was low enough that a man 10 feet away might not hear it, but Ethan felt it through the leather strap beneath his fingers. The print pointed toward the crack, then away from it. Whoever had come here had not just passed by. They had stopped, looked, measured, maybe listened. Ethan lifted his eyes to the tree line above the basalt wall. Evening had thickened beneath the pines, turning the spaces between the trunks black and narrow. The ridgeline gave him nothing. No movement, no shine of glass, no breath of cigarette smoke. Still, the skin along his forearms tightened. He had learned overseas that the ground usually spoke louder than people did. A bent blade of grass, a rock turned the wrong way, a fresh tread where there should have been none. Those things did not lie. He stood slowly. Back, he whispered. Duke obeyed, though every step down the slope looked like it cost him patience. Ethan did not turn his back on the ridge until they reached the lower fence. That night he did not switch on the kitchen light. He moved through the house in darkness, comfortable with the shape of his own rooms. He checked the front window first, then the back, then the narrow side window that faced the barn. The ranch yard sat under moonlight, pale and brittle. The water tank cast a round black shadow. The windmill stood still. Duke remained near the back door, not lying down, not resting, watching. Ethan set the old rusted sign on the kitchen table beside the county records he had copied in town. The words on the paper looked harmless in daylight. Emergency Water Storage Project, 1935. Bitterroot Sector 7. But outside, under the dark ridge, those words had weight. He pulled a small notebook from the drawer and wrote what he had seen. Fresh boot print at crack. Large square heel, likely male. Approached from west side slope. No vehicle heard. Duke alerted. He paused, pen hovering over the page. Then he added one more line. Assume, observed. The word sat there like a line from another life. He closed the notebook. At 2:07 the morning, Duke woke him. Not with a bark, with pressure. A cold nose against Ethan's hand. Once, then again. Ethan opened his eyes. Duke stood beside the bed, body angled toward the back of the house. His ears were forward. His mouth was closed. No panting. Alert, Ethan swung his legs to the floor without speaking. He pulled on jeans, took the flashlight from the nightstand, but kept it off. The rifle stayed locked in the cabinet. He did not need it for this. He needed his eyes, his ears, and the dog. They moved to the kitchen. The house creaked softly around them. Outside, The night was still. Too still. Ethan leaned just far enough past the curtain to see the north fence. At first, there was nothing. Then he saw it. A shape beyond the cattle gate. A truck. Dark. Engine off. No headlights. Parked where the county road curved near the cottonwoods. A person could sit there and watch the house. Watch the barn. Watch the slope behind it. Duke's lips lifted just enough to show teeth. Ethan touched 2 fingers to the dog's shoulder. Hold. He waited. Counted slowly. 1 minute. 2. The truck remained. Then Ethan turned on the porch light. The yellow bulb snapped awake, washing the yard in weak light. The truck started at once. No hesitation, no door slam, no startled scramble. Just engine on, reverse lights, then a smooth retreat down the road, professional enough to bother him. Ethan watched until the truck vanished beyond the bend. He did not sleep after that. By sunrise, he had walked the fence line. Duke stayed close despite his wrapped paws, stopping now and then to test the air. Near the north gate, Ethan found tire marks in the dust. Wide tread. Newer tires. Heavy pickup. He photographed them with his old phone. At the gate post, something else caught his eye. A cigarette butt pressed into the dirt. The end, still faintly stained. The paper not yet fully dry from night dew. Ethan picked it up with a pair of pliers and dropped it into a plastic feed bag. Cole Brennan did not smoke, at least not in public. That meant either Cole had sent someone or someone else had started to care about the ridge. Neither option improved the morning. By noon, Ethan carried tools up to the crack and covered his red paint mark with mud and loose moss. Then he scattered old brush around the entrance. Not enough to hide it completely from a careful eye, but enough to make a casual look useless. Duke watched him work. "You found it," Ethan said quietly. "Now, we keep it." The dog blinked once, as if the agreement had already been made. For the next 2 days, Ethan worked in silence. He hauled old boards from the barn and built a temporary brace inside the narrow passage. He marked weak stone with chalk and tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spots. He studied the pipe in the cavern, and traced the way it disappeared toward the ranch. Every trip into the mountain began with the same routine. Stop at entrance. Listen. Check the slope. Clear. Move. Duke waited when told, entered when allowed, and once refused to step forward, until Ethan noticed a loose slab above the crawl space. The dog had become more than company. He had become the second set of eyes Ethan trusted more than his own. On the 3rd morning, Ethan opened the tool shed and stopped. The padlock hung twisted, not open, broken. The hasp had been pried loose from the wood. Inside, things were not thrown around. That would have been easier. This was worse. Someone had searched carefully. The crowbar was gone. So was a coil of rope. A short-handled shovel was missing from its hook. Ethan stood in the doorway, looking at the empty spaces. Duke stepped past him into the shed, nose low, moving with slow precision. He sniffed the workbench, the floor near the door, then stopped at the back wall. There, pressed into the dust beneath the window, was the same square-heeled boot print from the ridge. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked toward the mountain. The morning sun had just touched the basalt face. Somewhere behind that stone, cold water waited in the dark. And now someone had tools to reach it. Ethan did not call the sheriff. Not yet. A broken lock and a missing crowbar were not enough to prove what he knew in his bones. Men like Cole Brennan did not leave fingerprints where fingerprints mattered. They left pressure. They left doubt. They let desperate people look unstable before they moved in with papers and smiles. So Ethan replaced the padlock, then did something he had not done in years. He made a plan. On the kitchen table, beside Claire's photograph, he laid out the old county maps, the copied federal pages, and a rough sketch of the cavern. He marked the crack, the reservoir, the collapsed pipe, and the probable direction of the old outlet line. The pipe seemed to angle downhill toward the ranch, maybe toward the dry gully beyond the barn. Duke lay beneath the table, head on his front paws. His wrapped feet twitched now and then, but his eyes followed Ethan's boots every time they moved. "You should be resting," Ethan said. Duke blinked. That was all. By mid-morning, Ethan was back inside the mountain. He entered slower than before, checking every brace he had placed. The crawlspace had a bad feel now, not because of the dark. Darkness had never bothered him much. It was the possibility that someone else had touched the stone, loosened something, changed one small piece of ground he had trusted. Duke followed close despite Ethan telling him twice to stay. In the cavern, the reservoir waited in silence. The water was so still it looked like black glass. Ethan moved along the edge toward the collapsed pipe, carrying a hand pick, a short shovel, and a coil of newer rope he had hidden in the barn rafters years ago and forgotten until that morning. He worked for hours, stone by stone, shovel by shovel. The collapsed section was mostly loose basalt and old mineral crust, mixed with mud that had dried hard as fired clay. Every few minutes he stopped, listened, and let the beam of his headlamp rest on the ceiling. Duke stood several feet behind him. Not in the way. Never in the way. Just close enough. Ethan found the pipe again, beneath the debris. It was larger than he'd expected, nearly 8 inches across, and angled through a concrete collar in the cavern wall. If he could clear it, maybe he could trace the old line. Maybe even open a flow path. He set the pick into a seam and levered hard. A slab shifted. Dust slid down the wall. Duke's ears snapped forward. Ethan froze. The sound came again, a tiny crack, high above. He lifted his headlamp. At first, he saw nothing. Then a thin line opened across the ceiling where old stone met old concrete. Duke lunged. Not barking, not warning, moving. The shepherd slammed his shoulder into Ethan's thigh with all the strength left in his aging body. Ethan fell sideways, hitting the cavern floor hard. The world erupted behind him. A section of rock and concrete crashed down where he had been kneeling one breath earlier. The impact punched dust into the air and sent fragments skittering across the stone. The sound rolled through the cavern, deep and violent, shaking the water into ripples. Ethan covered his head until the echoes faded. Then he heard Duke, a sharp breath, not a yelp. Worse, controlled pain. Ethan rolled over. Duke. The dog was on his feet, but his front left shoulder had been cut by a jagged piece of fallen stone. Blood darkened the fur above his leg and ran in a thin line toward his paw. Ethan crawled to him. Easy. Easy, boy. Duke tried to step toward him and nearly folded. Ethan caught him under the chest. For a moment, the cavern tilted. Blood on fur. Dust in the air. The weight of a body leaning into him. Another place. Another day. A young corporal on a hot landing zone outside Kandahar, one hand pressed to his side, trying to tell Ethan he was fine when he was not fine at all. Rotor wash. Red smoke. Someone yelling for a medevac bird. Someone else shouting that the LZ was not clear. Ethan's hands moved before memory could swallow him. Pressure first. Stop the bleeding. Assess. Breathe. He pulled the old military first aid kit from his pack, tore open gauze, and pressed it firmly against Duke's shoulder. The dog's eyes stayed on him, trusting, waiting. No panic. That's it, Ethan whispered. Stay with me. His voice sounded rough in the cavern. He wrapped the wound tight, using gauze and tape, then checked Duke's leg, ribs, and breathing. The cut was ugly, but the shoulder still moved. No bone showing. No deep tear into the joint. Lucky. Too lucky. Ethan sat back on the stone, one hand still resting against Duke's neck. Dust drifted slowly through the headlamp beam. The rockfall had revealed a darker pocket behind the collapsed section, not the pipe. Something beside it. A square edge. Metal. Ethan stared at it, then looked down at Duke. The dog had pushed him out of the way of falling stone and paid for it in blood. Again, the mountain had taken something before giving anything back. Ethan leaned forward and cleared loose debris with one hand while keeping Duke close with the other. The object emerged slowly. A steel box. Old. About the size of an ammunition can, sealed with rust and mineral crust, wedged behind the broken pipe as if someone had hidden it there before the collapse. Ethan's breath caught. On the lid, beneath a smear of mud, something had been scratched into the metal. The same 3 letters, TC. Duke lowered himself beside him with a tired sigh. Ethan rested his hand on the box. Whatever was inside had waited nearly 90 years in the dark, and Duke had nearly died bringing him to it. Ethan did not open the steel box inside the cavern. Not because he lacked curiosity, because experience had taught him that exhaustion and excitement made poor partners. The shoulder wound needed attention. The mountain was unstable, and whatever secrets the box contained had already survived nearly a century. They could survive one more night. The climb back to the surface was slow. Ethan carried most of the weight, not the box. Duke. The shepherd insisted on walking, but every few yards, his injured leg weakened beneath him. By the time they reached the crack, Ethan had one arm beneath the dog's chest. Outside, evening sunlight spilled across the ridge in shades of copper and gold. For a few seconds, Ethan simply stood there breathing fresh air, the mountain behind him, the valley below, Duke leaning against his leg, the old steel box tucked safely inside his pack. Back at the ranch, the first stop was the workshop. The second was the kitchen table. The third was the medicine cabinet. Duke endured the cleaning without complaint. The cut looked ugly in the light, a deep tear across the shoulder muscle, not life-threatening, but painful, very painful. And Ethan cleaned it thoroughly, trimmed away matted fur, then stitched the worst section with the same steady hands that had once closed wounds beneath helicopter rotors and desert dust. Duke never snapped, never pulled away. When it was over, he lowered his head onto Ethan's knee. The simple trust of it hit harder than Ethan expected. "You're getting too old for heroics." The shepherd's tail thumped once. Hours later, after darkness settled across the valley, Ethan finally placed the steel box on the kitchen table. The ranch house felt unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. He examined the lid carefully. Heavy steel, military-grade hinges, no lock, just decades of rust. The initials remained visible beneath the dirt. T.C. Ethan slid a screwdriver beneath the edge. The seal cracked. A smell drifted out. Old paper, metal, time. Inside sat 3 items: a leather-bound journal, a folded map tube, and a black-and-white photograph. Ethan picked up the photograph first. The image showed 6 men standing beside a partially completed reservoir entrance. All wore work clothes from another era. Behind them rose the same basalt ridge, the same mountain, the same place. One of the men stood in front, tall, lean, sharp eyes. Ethan's breath caught. He had seen that face before. Not in person. In family photographs. Thomas Carter. His grandfather. The man he had never met. The man who had died before Ethan was born. For several moments, he simply stared. Then he opened the journal. The first page contained neat engineering notes. Dates. Measurements. Construction records. Water flow estimates. The handwriting was precise and disciplined. Military. Several pages later, Ethan found confirmation. Thomas Carter, Army Corps of Engineers, assigned to federal emergency infrastructure projects throughout the western states. Ethan sat back, slowly. His grandfather had helped build the reservoir, not just worked on it, built it. The realization settled over him, like the weight of a hand on his shoulder. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere beyond the pasture. Inside, the old clock ticked steadily. Page after page revealed details of the project. The reservoir had been created during the drought years of the 1930s. Federal engineers had discovered a massive underground aquifer beneath the ridge and designed a hidden emergency storage system capable of supporting ranches throughout the valley during disaster years. Then Ethan found the final section. The handwriting changed. Less technical, more personal. The entries became shorter, more urgent. A date near the end caught his attention. October 1936. The reservoir is complete. The valley does not yet understand what waits beneath the mountain. Perhaps that is for the best. Several pages later, funding withdrawn, project sealed, records archived, water remains, the mountain remembers. Ethan turned another page, then stopped. His grandfather had written one final note. Not for the government, not for supervisors, for family. If this reservoir is ever found again, the valley is likely facing hardship, drought, fire, or worse. Whoever stands here after me must remember this. The water was never meant for one ranch. It belongs to everyone who depends on this land. Ethan read the sentence twice, then a third time. The room seemed smaller suddenly. The reservoir could save his ranch. That much was obvious. But Thomas Carter had envisioned something larger, a lifeline for an entire valley, a responsibility, not merely an opportunity. Beneath the journal lay the folded map. Ethan opened it carefully. The paper crackled. Hand-drawn survey lines spread across the table. The reservoir occupied the center. but what caught his attention were the lines extending outward. Old distribution routes, pipelines, overflow channels, storage points, a network, not finished. 35. But planned. His grandfather had intended to move water beyond the mountain, far beyond. Duke lifted his head from the floor. Outside, headlights flashed briefly through the front window. Gone just as quickly, Ethan froze. The county road sat nearly half a mile away. No vehicle should have been visible from that angle. He moved quietly to the window. Darkness. Nothing. Then he noticed something else. The weather radio on the counter emitted a soft alert tone. He turned it on. A meteorologist's voice filled the room. Critical fire weather conditions expected across western Montana. Extreme drought, low humidity, high winds. Avoid all outdoor burning. Potential for rapid wildfire growth. Ethan looked toward the dark ridge behind the ranch, then down at the map spread across the table. The reservoir, the valley, the old distribution network, his grandfather's warning. Fire, or worse. Outside, Duke rose slowly to his feet. The dog stared toward the mountain, listening, watching, as if he sensed the same thing Ethan suddenly felt. The reservoir had not been hidden for 90 years by accident. It had been waiting for the exact kind of summer now unfolding beyond the ranch windows. The first smoke appeared 3 days later. Ethan saw it at sunrise, a thin gray smear against the northern horizon. At first it looked harmless, just another distant haze hanging above the mountains. By noon it had become a column. By evening it had become a wall. The weather radio remained on throughout the day. Red flag warning. Extreme fire behavior possible. Wind shift expected. Low humidity. Evacuation notices under consideration. Every announcement seemed aimed directly at the valley. Duke noticed the smoke, before the cattle did. The old shepherd stood near the north fence for nearly an hour, nose lifted toward the wind. The scent carried something primal. Burning pine, hot sap, dry timber, the smell of a forest becoming fuel. Ethan spent the morning studying the reservoir map spread across the hood of his truck. His grandfather's hand-drawn notes suddenly felt less like history and more like instructions. He marked possible channel routes, measured elevation changes, calculated flow direction. The old distribution system had never been completed, but enough remained to work with. Maybe, if he moved fast enough. The problem wasn't the water anymore. The problem was time. Just after lunch, a pickup appeared at the ranch. Cole Brennan. Again. This time, he didn't bother smiling. He climbed from the truck and removed his sunglasses. Behind him, smoke drifted across the distant ridges. You've seen the forecasts. Ethan kept working on the map. I can read. Cole folded his arms. The valley's going to burn. No guarantee of that. There's every guarantee of it. The silence stretched. Finally, Cole stepped closer. You still owe the county. Ethan said nothing. The cattle are thin. Silence. The ranch isn't worth saving. Still silence. Cole's jaw tightened. Then he pulled an envelope from inside his truck. A contract. Already signed on one side. A number sat at the bottom. Higher than previous offers. Much higher. Enough to clear the taxes. Enough to settle every debt. Enough for Ethan to walk away. Enough. Cole laid it on the hood. Last chance. The smoke behind him darkened. The wind shifted. For a brief moment, Ethan imagined accepting. No more bills. No more drought. No more waking up at 2 a.m. listening for trouble. Just peace. Then his eyes drifted to the house. To the porch where Claire used to drink coffee. To the pasture where Duke still limped after him despite the wound. To the mountain. To the reservoir. To his grandfather's journal. The answer arrived before the thought finished forming. No. Cole stared. You haven't even read it. I don't need to. The smile disappeared completely now. For the first time, Ethan saw irritation beneath the polished surface. You're making a mistake. Maybe. Cole looked toward the ridge, toward the place hidden behind thousands of tons of stone. His eyes lingered there slightly too long. Then he nodded once. Good luck, Ethan. He drove away. Dust followed him down the road. Duke watched until the truck disappeared. That evening, the sheriff's department sent emergency notifications to every phone in the valley. Wildfire, expanding. Forward movement accelerating. Prepare evacuation plans. The fire had started from a lightning strike deep inside the national forest. Strong winds had done the rest. Now, thousands of acres burned. By nightfall, Ethan could see a faint orange glow beyond the northern ridges. Not flames, reflections. The sky itself seemed infected. The next morning the cattle grew restless. Animals always sensed disaster before people admitted it. Birds moved strangely. Deer appeared near open roads. Even the wind sounded different, dry, sharp, hungry. Ethan spent the day reopening sections of the old water route. He cleared debris from a shallow drainage channel that angled downhill from the ridge. Most of it had collapsed decades ago, but traces remained. Enough to follow, enough to rebuild. Duke accompanied him everywhere. The shoulder wound slowed him. The stitches pulled when he climbed. Yet every time Ethan tried to leave him behind, the dog refused. By late afternoon, they reached an old section of buried pipe emerging from the hillside, exactly where the map suggested it should be. Ethan brushed dirt away. Steel. Rusty. Ancient. But intact. His grandfather's system was still there, waiting. Hope stirred again. Then the wind changed. Hard. Sudden. Violent. The smell of smoke slammed into the valley. Not distant anymore. Close. Very close. Ethan looked north. The horizon glowed orange. This time, the glow moved. A thin line of fire crested a distant ridge. Tiny, but unmistakable. The wildfire had entered the next drainage basin. Closer than anyone expected. The radio confirmed it an hour later. Containment lines failing. Additional crews requested. Water shortages reported at multiple staging areas. Ethan sat on the porch after sunset listening to the updates. Duke lay beside him. Neither slept much. Around midnight, the sky turned red. Not bright. Just enough. Enough to paint the clouds. Enough to remind everyone in the valley that something enormous was coming. The next morning, the first evacuation trailers rolled down the county road. Families. Livestock. Horse trailers. Campers. People leaving. People hoping they would have something to return to. At noon, Cole Brennan appeared one final time. He didn't stop. Didn't get out. He simply slowed his truck near Ethan's gate. Looked toward the ranch. Looked toward the ridge. Then drove away, heading south. Away from danger. Away from the valley. The sight bothered Ethan more than it should have. Men like Cole rarely abandoned opportunities, unless they believed the opportunity was already lost. That evening, Duke suddenly stood. Every muscle in his body tightened. His ears locked toward the north. Ethan followed his gaze. Beyond the pasture, beyond the cottonwoods, beyond the county road. A thin line of flame appeared along the dark horizon. Small, distant, moving. The wildfire had reached the valley, and according to the weather report, by morning, it would be less than 5 miles from the ranch. Ethan stood on the porch long after midnight, watching the northern sky pulse orange behind the ridges. The glow reminded him of something he had spent years trying to forget. Not the fire itself, the horizon. The way distant danger could look beautiful right before it became deadly. Duke sat beside him, silent. The shepherd's stitched shoulder had healed enough for movement, but Ethan could see the stiffness whenever the dog stood too quickly. Neither of them slept much. By dawn, ash was falling. Tiny gray flakes drifted through the valley like dirty snow. The smell of smoke had settled into everything. The barn, the fences, the cattle, even the coffee tasted different. Ethan stepped into the kitchen and spread his grandfather's map across the table one final time. The reservoir, the old pipe routes, the unfinished distribution lines. The answer had been there all along. The mountain already contained the water. What it needed was a path. He folded the map, grabbed his tool bag, and went to war. Not against people, against time, against fire. Okay. Against a summer that wanted to erase everything. By mid-morning, the ranch no longer looked like a ranch. It looked like a field operation. Old habits had returned completely. Ethan divided the property into sectors. North sector, barn sector, water route, evacuation corridor. The language came naturally, the same way it had years ago inside dusty briefing tents. He marked positions with bright tape, assigned priorities, built contingencies. The difference now was that his team consisted of one aging rancher and an aging German shepherd. Yet somehow that felt familiar too. Duke followed him everywhere, watching, listening, learning. The first breakthrough came shortly after noon. Ethan located a buried section of the original pipeline, nearly 400 yards downhill from the reservoir ridge. The steel line was corroded, but intact. He cleared brush around it and followed the route across the slope. More sections emerged. Then another, and another. His grandfather's network had not disappeared. It had simply been forgotten. By early afternoon, neighbors began arriving. First, Samuel Whitaker from the adjacent ranch. Then the Hernandez brothers from the southern pasture. Then 2 volunteer firefighters whose tanker truck sat nearly empty. Everyone had seen the smoke. Everyone knew water was becoming the problem. Then Cast. Ethan showed them the map. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Samuel pointed toward the ridge. "You're telling me there's enough water up there to help stop this thing?" Ethan looked at the mountain. "I think so. Think. Not know. Think." But it was enough. The work began immediately. Men brought shovels. Women brought tools. Teenagers hauled pipe sections. The entire valley seemed to move at once. Word spread faster than Ethan expected. A hidden reservoir. An old federal project. Emergency water. Hope. For the first time since the fire started, people stopped talking about evacuation. They started talking about fighting back. The afternoon became a blur of labor. Dig. Clear. Connect. Test. Repeat. Sweat mixed with ash. Smoke thickened. The sky darkened. And still, they worked. Near sunset, Ethan climbed back into the cavern to open one of the ancient control valves connected to the old outlet system. The mechanism sat beneath decades of mineral buildup. Rust coated every surface. He braced his boots and pulled. Nothing. Pulled again. Still nothing. The metal felt fused to the earth itself. He wiped sweat from his eyes and repositioned the wrench. Outside the mountain, the fire continued moving. Every minute mattered. He set his jaw and applied more force. The valve groaned, shifted, moved, just enough. Then Duke barked. One sharp bark. Rare. Urgent. Ethan turned. The shepherd stood near the cavern entrance. Not looking at him, looking upward. The old soldier's instincts reacted instantly. Movement. Above. Ethan dove sideways. A split second later, a burning pine crashed through the cavern entrance tunnel. The tree had been weakened by fire somewhere above the ridge. Its roots had finally given way. Stone exploded. Dust filled the air. Flaming debris scattered across the entrance chamber. Heat surged through the tunnel. For several seconds, Ethan heard nothing but ringing. Then he looked for Duke. The shepherd had avoided the worst of the impact, but not all of it. A falling branch had struck his hind leg. The dog struggled to put weight on it. "Duke!" Ethan dropped beside him. The shepherd licked his hand once, still alert, still trying to stand, still more concerned about Ethan than himself. The sight hit harder than the collapsing rock. Ethan checked the leg quickly. Bruised, possibly sprained, not broken. Thank God. He wrapped it as best he could, using spare bandages from his kit. Outside, voices echoed from the ridge, people calling, smoke drifting through the trees. The fire was closer now, much closer. Then Samuel appeared at the entrance. His face was gray with ash. "Ethan, what is it?" Samuel pointed downhill. "The line's working." For one beautiful moment, Ethan thought the battle might already be won. Then Samuel added 3 words. "The last valve." Everything stopped. "The what?" Samuel swallowed. "The last valve controls the main flow route. The big one. Without it, we're only getting a fraction of the water." Ethan looked toward the map folded in his pocket, toward the reservoir, toward the old engineering design. He already knew where the final valve sat. At the far end of the original system, directly beneath the advancing fire line, the largest control point, the most important one, and now the most dangerous. Outside, the sky glowed red. Inside the mountain, cold water waited behind ancient steel. Ethan slowly stood. Duke struggled to his feet beside him. The old shepherd's injured leg trembled. Yet he moved into position at Ethan's side anyway, ready, waiting, because somewhere ahead, beneath smoke and flame, one final valve remained closed. And if they failed to reach it before the fire did, the reservoir might not save anyone at all. The mountain disappeared behind smoke before sunrise. Ash drifted through the valley in thick gray sheets, settling on roofs, fences, trucks, and cattle like winter arriving in the wrong season. The fire had crossed another ridge during the night. Now it moved through dry timber, less than 3 miles away. The air tasted burned. Every breath carried pine resin and smoke. Every gust carried urgency. Ethan stood beside the old distribution map, spread across the hood of his truck. Around him, neighbors worked without being asked. Hoses, shovels, fuel cans, water tanks. People who had spent years waving at one another from passing pickups now moved like a single crew. The reservoir had given them something they had not felt in days. A chance. Not certainty, but a chance. Samuel approached, carrying a radio. The fire crews are almost out of reserve water on the east line. Ethan nodded. He already knew. The reservoir was flowing now. Water surged through portions of the restored system and filled temporary holding tanks, but only a fraction. The final valve remained closed. The main channel remained trapped, and every minute mattered. He folded the map. "I'm going." Samuel looked toward the smoke. "You don't have to." "Yeah," Ethan replied quietly. "I do." Duke was already standing beside the truck. The shepherd's shoulder wound had stiffened overnight. His rear leg still favored one side. Yet when Ethan opened the passenger door, Duke climbed in without hesitation. Some battles were chosen. Some simply arrived. The drive toward the upper ridge took them through a landscape that no longer felt familiar. The sky glowed orange. The sunlight itself had become strange, muted, filtered through smoke. Trees emerged from the haze like ghosts. Half a mile from the valve site, the road ended beneath fallen timber. Ethan parked. The rest would be on foot. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders. Water. Tools. The old wrench. First aid kit. Radio. Then he looked at Duke. "Stay behind me." The shepherd blinked. Neither of them believed that would happen. They entered the smoke together. Step. Pause. Listen. Move. The rhythm returned naturally. Years vanished. Not emotionally, physically. His body remembered. Cross open ground. Check elevation. Observe likely hazards. Move again. The old military training never truly disappeared. It simply waited. Ahead, flames flickered between the trees. Not a wall yet, but close. Too close. The final valve sat inside a small concrete control station built into the hillside decades earlier. According to the map, it regulated nearly 70% of the reservoir's output. Without it, the system remained crippled. With it, everything changed. The smoke thickened. Visibility dropped. 20 yards. 15. 10. Duke suddenly stopped. His ears rose. Every muscle tightened. Ethan froze immediately. The dog wasn't looking ahead. He was looking up. The old warning. The same warning that had saved him twice already. Ethan followed Duke's gaze. A massive ponderosa pine towered above the trail. Its trunk burned from within. The fire had hollowed it out. The tree still stood. Barely. A cracking sound echoed through the smoke. Ethan moved instinctively, not backward, sideways, fast. A second later, the giant pine collapsed across the trail. The impact shook the hillside. Branches exploded outward. One struck Duke before Ethan could react. The shepherd disappeared beneath a cloud of ash and needles. "Duke!" Ethan dropped beside him. The dog struggled up immediately. Alive. Breathing, but limping harder now. The rear leg had taken another hit. The old shepherd leaned against him briefly, then turned toward the hillside again, toward the valve, still focused, still working. Ethan swallowed hard. 3 times, 3 separate times, the dog had saved him. Again, there was no time to think about it. The fire was advancing. They reached the control station minutes later. The concrete structure emerged from the smoke like a bunker, half buried, cracked, forgotten. The valve wheel sat inside, huge, corroded, frozen by decades of neglect. Ethan set the wrench, pulled, nothing. Again, nothing. The metal refused to move. The radio crackled, voices, urgent. The fire had breached another containment line, water reserves dropping, time running out. Ethan tightened his grip. Every muscle in his arm strained. The wheel groaned, shifted, stopped. Not enough. The old memories returned suddenly. Not trauma, determination. Engineers working through the night. Men refusing to quit because someone else's survival depended on it. One more pull. One more try. One more push. He planted both boots, pulled with everything left. The valve screamed, then turned. A quarter rotation, then another, then another. Deep beneath the mountain, something awakened. A vibration moved through the pipe. Low. Powerful. Alive. Water. Moving. At first, only a trickle, then a surge, then a roar. The ancient system came alive. 70 years, 80 years, nearly 90 years of silence ended in a single moment. The reservoir was finally open. Far below, water exploded into the restored channels. Holding tanks filled, pumps surged. Fire crews radioed new supply confirmations almost immediately. The valley finally had what it desperately needed. Water. Enough water. At last, the trip back down the ridge blurred together. Smoke, heat, ash, exhaustion. By the time Ethan reached the truck, his legs trembled. Duke made it halfway, then collapsed. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Simply empty. The shepherd lowered himself into the ash-covered dirt and could not rise again. Duke. Ethan dropped beside him. The dog's breathing was shallow. His eyes remained open. Trusting. Waiting. Ethan slid both arms beneath him. The shepherd felt heavier than he ever had. Or perhaps Ethan was simply more tired. He carried Duke to the truck. Every step hurt. Every breath burned. Yet he never stopped. The valley below shimmered through smoke. Water now flowed where none had flowed for generations. People would survive because of it. Homes might survive because of it. The ranch might survive because of it. But none of those thoughts mattered as much as the dog lying across the passenger seat. The veterinarian met them at a temporary emergency station near town. She examined Duke immediately, then looked at Ethan. Her expression revealed the truth before she spoke. The shepherd was exhausted, injured, dehydrated, and old. Very old. We'll do everything we can, she said softly. Ethan nodded. He sat beside Duke through the evening. Outside, sirens moved through the valley. Water trucks rolled. Fire crews continued fighting. The reservoir continued flowing. The future of the valley looked brighter than it had 24 hours earlier. Yet Ethan barely noticed. For the first time since finding the crack in the mountain, he felt powerless. Because this was one problem he could not solve with a wrench, or a map, or determination. Late that night, the veterinarian returned. She checked Duke again, then met Ethan's eyes. We'll know more by morning. The words landed heavier than any falling stone. Outside, water flowed through the valley. Inside, Ethan sat beside the old German shepherd who had found it. And for the first time since the fire began, all he could do was wait. The veterinary clinic had been transformed into a temporary emergency center. Volunteer firefighters slept in folding chairs. Ranchers waited for updates on livestock. Maps covered the walls. Radios crackled constantly. Outside, the valley was still fighting for itself. Inside, Ethan sat with Duke. The shepherd lay on a blanket near the treatment room window. Bandages covered his shoulder and hind leg. An IV line delivered fluids slowly. His breathing was steady but shallow. For hours, neither moved much. At some point after midnight, Ethan drifted into a chair beside him. Not sleep, something lighter. The kind of exhaustion that leaves a man floating between memories and reality. He dreamed of Afghanistan. Not combat. Silence. A desert sunrise. A patrol moving through dust. The distant sound of boots on gravel. Then another sound replaced it. Water. Flowing water. He opened his eyes. Morning sunlight streamed through the clinic window. For a second, he did not know where he was. Then he looked down. Duke was awake. The old shepherd's eyes met his. His tail moved once. Then again. Ethan laughed. The sound surprised both of them. The veterinarian entered moments later. She smiled, before speaking. He's going to be okay. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Not because he was emotional, because something inside him finally relaxed. The tension he had carried for months simply let go. Outside, the valley looked different. Rain had finally arrived during the night. Not much, but enough. Combined with the reservoir, enough. The wildfire had been contained. Not completely extinguished, but stopped. Held. The water flowing from the mountain had supplied firefighting crews throughout the most critical hours. Holding ponds had filled. Tankers had refilled faster. Fire lines had held where they otherwise might have failed. The valley remained standing. 3 weeks later, the first community gathering took place at the base of the ridge. People came from every direction. Ranchers, firefighters, county officials, families who had nearly evacuated, children carrying homemade signs. The drought still existed, The work of rebuilding still remained, but the immediate danger had passed. The reservoir had changed everything. Engineers from the state surveyed the site. Historians reviewed the documents. The Department of the Interior verified the old records. Within a month, the hidden reservoir was officially designated a historical infrastructure site. The story spread quickly. Newspapers wrote about it. Regional television crews arrived. Reporters wanted interviews. Most wanted to talk about Ethan. He always redirected them. "You should be talking about Duke." At first they laughed. Then they heard the story. How the dog found the crack. How he refused to leave it. How he saved Ethan beneath the falling rock. How he warned him before the burning tree collapsed. How none of it would have happened without him. After that, nobody laughed. One Saturday morning, Ethan drove slowly up the ridge. Duke sat beside him, moving better now. Still slower than before. Still carrying a slight limp, but healing. The mountain looked different. Not because the stone had changed, because people understood what was hidden beneath it now. At the crack in the basalt wall, a small crowd waited. Samuel Whitaker, the Hernandez family, volunteer firefighters, county workers, even Nora from the records office. At the center stood a wooden post covered by a canvas cloth. Samuel grinned. "You ready?" Ethan looked at Duke. The shepherd tilted his head. Samuel pulled away the cloth. A handcrafted wooden sign appeared beneath it. The letters had been carved by hand. Simple, honest, permanent. Duke's Gate. For several seconds nobody spoke. Wind moved softly through the pines. Somewhere below, water flowed through newly restored channels. A child began clapping. Then another. Soon everyone joined. Not loud, not dramatic, just sincere. Ethan looked down at Duke. The shepherd stared at the sign without understanding any of it, which somehow made the moment better. Because Duke had never wanted recognition. He had simply done what loyal dogs do. He stayed, he protected, he trusted. That was enough. Months passed. Autumn arrived, then winter. The reservoir continued flowing. New storage tanks were built. The old distribution routes were expanded. Families throughout the valley gained reliable emergency water access for the first time in generations. Cole Brennan's plans quietly collapsed. Without access to the land surrounding the reservoir, his expansion projects lost support. Investors moved elsewhere. Eventually, he sold several holdings and disappeared from local conversations altogether. The valley remembered the water, not him. One evening, the following spring, Ethan sat on a wooden bench overlooking the ranch. The grass had returned. Green-covered hills that had been brown for months. The cattle looked healthy again. Snowmelt glimmered on distant peaks. Below, water moved through the restored channels exactly as Thomas Carter had once imagined. The reservoir had become part of the valley again, part of its future. Duke climbed onto the bench platform beside him. Slower now, one careful step at a time. His injured leg still carried a slight hitch. But he made it. As always. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the shepherd's neck. Warm fur, steady breathing, familiar presence. The sun drifted lower. Golden light spilled across the valley. Years earlier, Ethan would have spent a moment like this, scanning horizons, checking roads, listening for threats, waiting for something bad to happen. That habit had followed him home from war, followed him through grief, through sleepless nights, through empty rooms after Claire died. But not tonight. Tonight, there was only wind moving through grass, water flowing beneath the mountain, and a dog resting beside him. The same dog everyone once assumed was simply an aging German shepherd belonging to a lonely veteran. The truth had turned out to be much larger. The hero, who saved the valley, had never worn a uniform, never attended meetings, never spoke a word. He simply refused to leave a crack in the rock. Far below, children played near one of the new water channels. Their laughter drifted upward on the evening breeze. Ethan listened, then looked toward Duke. The shepherd's eyes were half closed. Content, peaceful, home. For the first time in many years, Ethan wasn't looking toward the horizon, waiting for danger. He was looking at what remained, at what had been saved, at what had been built. The mountain stood silent behind them. The reservoir flowed steadily beneath it. And beside the entrance known now as Duke's Gate, water continued its journey through the valley, just as it had for generations, and just as it would for generations more. Some legacies are built by engineers. Some are built by soldiers. And some begin with the loyalty of a single old dog who refuses to walk away. The water kept flowing. The valley kept growing. And as the sun disappeared behind the Bitterroot Mountains, Ethan Carter realized that healing had arrived the same way hope had, quietly, one step at a time, right beside him. If Duke's loyalty touched your heart, comment 1 below. And if you believe some heroes walk on 4 legs, make sure to subscribe, because the next story may be the one you never forget.